out. Oh, great. Thank you, Julie. We're going to talk about Fulbright. And we've got a very knowledgeable and a former Fulbright scholar, Mary Stanton, is going to do the presentation. Mary, would you like me to do a further introduction, or do you just want to start your presentation?
I'll just start. I don't know how long it's going to be. So first of all, I want you to know that I'm just getting over a bad case of laryngitis, and so my voice is kind of gravelly. And I want to start out by thanking you all for your interest, especially Ellen and Joni, for asking me to do this presentation. It is really important for people to know how insidiously the current administration is trying to destroy, from many different angles, international education, and specifically Fulbright, because it is the flagship and the longest standing exchange program. I want to give a special thank you to Joni for helping me set up and advertise this presentation. And my last thank you is to our own league member, Patty Ann Norgren, and my friends Phil Rakita and Pam Nelson for helping me with editing and on this program. So next slide, please. The focus of this presentation is Fulbright Under Fire and the co-opting and the defunding of international educational exchanges. This is a really serious, I'm biased, of course, an ongoing issue, especially given that last Friday there was a very quiet release of the White House's national security agenda. I don't know how many of you are aware of it. Um, it's interesting to me how the media is manipulated. Some information gets out over and over again very strongly, and some of it just kind of sneaks under the network. But anyway, this agenda basically is removing the United States from all post-war II organizations that were created to promote peace, prevent another war after World War II. And so it's a real strong hit on international programs, and specifically Fulbright, which I think you'll understand better when I go over the history. Um, my agenda is that first I'll go over the history, the types of programs, and the funding and administration. I'm doing this, it's kind of dry, it's kind of detailed, but I think you'll better understand how strongly Fulbright has roots in democracy and continues to support and expand democracy throughout the world. Um, and then I'll get into the meat, which is what has changed under the new administration. Next slide, please. So I'll start out right out front saying that Fulbright primarily defends democracy by promoting free speech, supporting academic freedom, sharing democratic values, the people to people soft diplomacy, which is really strong. And then, as a little aside, just so you know what kind of a long-term impact the program has had, our alumni include 40 plus current and former heads of state, diplomats, public servants, scientists, educators, and civil society leaders, and a couple of Pulitzer Prize winners. Next slide, please. So we have this man from Arkansas, J. William Fulbright, who was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And during his time there, he became very skeptical of isolationism, and he learned how intertwined the world is and was at the time that he was there. I don't know how much you know about his history. He was a professor for a while, and then he went into the Congress. And as a U.S. congressman, Fulbright debated the importance of maintaining peace after the devastation of World War II, and he authored the Fulbright Resolution. And I think it's important to begin understand the roots of the program by reading what this resolution was. And this is, it says here, it was September 21st, 1943. Resolved by the House of Representatives, the Senate concurring, that the Congress hereby expresses itself as favoring the creation of appropriate international machinery with power adequate to establish and to maintain a just and lasting peace among the nations of the world and as favoring participation by the United States therein through its constitutional processes. So we have the basis of the Constitution as this program is developed. In 1946, Senator Fulbright promoted the Fulbright Program to foster mutual understanding between the U.S. and other nations through educational exchange. Next slide, please. So, on August 1st, in 1946, the Fulbright Scholars Act was signed into law, and it began with educational grants to U.S. scholars to study abroad and for foreign scholars to study in the U.S. And this is an iconic picture here, and it's obviously President Harry S. Truman signing the act, the Fulbright Scholars Act, and then we have Senator, then Senator, no longer Congressman, J. William Fulbright over his shoulder. But then I'm getting three different pieces of information about who the third person is. According to the archives at the University of Arkansas, it's actually William Benton, who is the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. And apparently, Benton was the person who was really promoting having Fulbright's name on the act. Next slide, please. So, what is the Fulbright program? It is incredibly diverse and it's very complicated. So, bear with me. There are 12 different programs. It started, okay, so we have um, or 12 different grants, I guess is a better way of saying it. There's the Fulbright U.S. Student Program, the Fulbright Foreign Student Program, the Fulbright Specialist Program, the Fulbright Visiting Scholar Program, and Fulbright in Residence Program, the Fulbright U.S. Scholar Program, the Fulbright English Teaching Assistant Program. And I want to just stop here because that particular program appeals and recruits a lot of recent undergraduate um, students who have finished their four-year degree or their two-year degree. So it's a younger population than some of the grants like for visiting universities professors. Next slide, please. The Fulbright Foreign Language Teaching Assistant Program, the Fulbright Teacher Exchange, Fulbright Arctic Initiative, the Hubert H. Humphrey Fellowship Program, the Fulbright National Geographic Storytelling Fellowship, and the Fulbright Hayes Doctoral Dissertation Research Abroad Fellowship Program. So you can see how wide and diverse it is. There's one program, and this is the program I was on in 2010 to 2011, which is no longer offered. It was a very expensive program. And that was the Fulbright Teacher Exchange, and a teacher exchange where I taught the classes of my Fulbright exchange teacher in India, and she taught my classes here in Richfield. Very powerful program because of the number of people in the community that the Fulbrighter interacts with. So, okay, next slide, please. How are these programs funded and administered? And this is where the White House is trying to gut the program by hitting the funding and by hitting the administration. So, interestingly, to me at least, you can't start a new program. Oh, the former one, please. You can't start a program. Can you go back, please?
Mhm. On the number. On the number.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties myself getting out of a program here.
No, that's fine. I can just ad lib here. The program started with what they call well, I've heard people call it war junk, but it was really with the surplus funds from World War II and the sale of war materials. Now, I'd really like to know who bought those war materials. I've also been told, and I don't have any fact checking for it, that some of the countries that are involved in the Fulbright program actually had money left over from World War II that they also contributed to the program. So, this very complex program starts with the State Department, and they have the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, ECA, that governs and governments of other countries and the private sector sponsoring the educational grants. There are 49 bilateral commissions and 116 U.S. embassies and 35 binational Fulbright commissions that annually contribute substantially more than the U.S. government. The biggest participant in the program is from Germany, and Germany pays 2/3 of the funding for the participants in the program on a yearly basis. Some countries can't afford to even pay half, but the programs go on. Now, after the ECA, we have the Institute for International Education under the supervision, of course, of the State Department's ECA as the contractor that's responsible for providing administrative assistance in the statewide management for the majority of the Fulbright Awards. Next slide, please. So there are some smaller organizations that have joined in to help fund these awards and these grants. We have Ahmed East managing awards for students and scholars in the Middle East and North Africa. We have RX managing U.S. and visiting teacher exchanges, and World Learning handles the Fulbright Specialist Program. That program is really geared towards professors, university professors. Okay, yearly, approximately 8,000 grants are awarded, and there's 135 bilateral exchanges. And that means that not only are these other countries helping with the funding, but they're sending their scholars, their students, their grantees to the United States. The application process is very complex, rigorous, multi-layered, and requires 12 to 15 months depending on the type of grant. So, next slide, please. And this is the most complex one, and I'm going to follow it with an easier graph to understand this. So the whole process starts in October or November, and IIE conducts a preliminary compliance review for the completeness and eligibility of applicants. Next, the organized national, I'm sorry, stay on this slide. I'm sorry, Julie, that was confusing. This is followed by the National Screening Committee that is composed of qualified external reviewers who interview and rank candidates in December and January. And this was my experience. I filled out the application form. It was very lengthy. I had to fill out some essays, and I sent it in. And then I was thankfully shortlisted and then I was contacted for an interview. I had, I think, 3 interviewers who were located in Nebraska who called me and conducted about an hour-long interview over the phone. I know my Fulbright exchange teacher and other applicants in India, they have to go all the way to Delhi to be interviewed in person. Okay, getting back to this. And then these candidates who were interviewed are ranked in December and January. And then IIE sends the National Committee's screeners the short list of semifinalists via ECA to the J. William Fulbright Scholarship Board, and that's called the FFSB. And I think you've heard of that in the news for review and approval. And this is supposed to be the last step in the application process. They're finalized by the FFSB, and that's it. Well, that wasn't the story this year. Okay, now, just to get a better idea on how little interference has been necessary, and also to understand how tight and well conducted the interview process is and the selection process is, there have been very, very few times when there's been any intervention at all on any of those steps of the process. The FFSB does have the right to intervene in the work of the NSC and or question its ranking and selection of commissions and embassies. However, it has rarely done so because of its confidence in the peer review and selection processes established by its own policies of national recruitment, open competition, maintenance of high academic standards, and stringent selection. The lists of candidates are next advanced to either the binational commissions, who make selections by committee after additional peer review, or to the embassies, where decisions are made by public diplomacy officers. So, in other words, what happens is after the U.S. does its selection of U.S. candidates, the FFSB gives those lists to either the commission, the Fulbright Commission in another country, or to the U.S. Embassy that handles the Fulbright, so that they can say, no, we don't want that candidate, or yes, we want that candidate. So yeah. These lists are okay, and then they rank them according to, just a minute here, I just had a little bit of problem here too. As finalists, and I lost part of my screen here, sorry. Okay, next slide, please. So here I have a graph that makes it a little easier and less complex. We have the State Department overseeing the ECA, which compiles and looks over the applicants, send it to IIE, who gives them to the National Screening Committee or Workforce, and they give their final list to the FFSB. Then FFSB gives the list to the Binational Commission, who peer reviews it, gives their final list, and then that goes back to the State Department and IIE. Or in the case of countries that do not have a Fulbright Commission, it goes to the U.S. Embassy, and they have their public diplomat officers that go over the lists, and then they send the list of finalists, alternates, and non-selects to IIE. So that is the process. Okay, next slide, please. So the FFSB does have the right to revoke grants after they have been finalized, but it does so rarely and only in the case of a misrepresentation, misconduct, or criminal behavior. Binational Fulbright Commissions in 49 countries and the public diplomacy section of the U.S. embassies handle the same agendas for foreign candidates for Fulbright grants to the U.S. that IIE handles for U.S. candidates applying to go abroad. They advertise the program, manage applications, rank candidates, and develop a list of finalists, alternates, and non-selects, which are advanced to the FFSB for approval. And now we're getting into an area where the current administration started to cause some problems. The target deadline to notify candidates is April 15th. So students and faculty can plan for the future. Students tend to commit to different opportunities, such as an internship, graduate school, or a job, if they're not notified of the status of their Fulbright application. Faculty also have lead times to apply for and receive lead. And then there's one more step in the process, and that is selected candidates receive grant authorization documents outlining timeframes, benefits, obligations of individual countries. The grant is also contingent on some other factors such as medical clearance, finalization of affiliations, receiving appropriate visas, etc. So like in my particular case, I was told I had a teacher match, but then following that, I had to have a medical clearance, I had to have a criminal clearance, I had to have some other things going on. It is a very long process, and they're very thorough in their selection. Next slide, please. So what happened this year after the new administrations? The applicants were not notified until mid-May. And you can see how that could have impacted how many people actually went on with their grants. Some visa interviews were delayed. And so some people, some grant recipients were worried if they would be able to come. The State Department placed a 15-day freeze on funding for all ECA grants in early February, pending review that stretched into March. I know as a member of the Minnesota chapter of the Fulbright Association, our president received some panic emails from some grantees in Minnesota that their money didn't come. They didn't know if they'd be able to finish their studies. They were worried they'd get evicted because they didn't have the money to pay their rent. They didn't know how they were going to get food because they didn't get the money they normally get. I know that we were advised from the Fulbright Association in Washington, D.C. to send all those concerns directly to them. And I know that the Fulbright Association in DC worked very closely with the Alliance for International Education to put pressure on those funds becoming released. But that 15-day freeze stretched into March, and that was a long time. So, what the consequence of this initially was that IIE was forced to furlough most of its staff that managed the ECA programs, which slowed down the stateside administration of the program. And I already talked to you about how some grantees were worried about not getting their money. And I will say now that all of that money did eventually get to them, 100% of it. It was just a panic 6 weeks there in terms of what's going to happen. And so that has been flowing all along. The Office of Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy halted the grant finalization to vet all grants to determine if they were in alignment with the new administration's policies and priorities. Next slide, please. This was done very quietly. I just learned about some of this fairly recently. So what happened is the Secretary of State directed the State Department to conduct an unprecedented review of Fulbright awards that had been finalized by the FFSB. This belated partisan political vetting was part of a sweeping review by the current administration to determine if State Department programs, not just Fulbright, were in alignment with its policies. The Fulbright awards that had been finalized for the 2025-26 academic year were reviewed for compatibility with the executive orders on DEI issued by the current administration after January 20th, 2025. Now, I've been told that they had AI go through and find some trigger words. I've got a 3-page printout graph of the words that were targeted. I can go through some of them. I have permission to go through some of them if you're interested. Climate crisis, clean energy, breastfed, commercial sex worker, assigned at birth, anti-racism, gender ideology. I mean, you're not going to be surprised. And if you're interested, just let me know if you want to know more of those. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, wait. No. I went ahead. Sorry, Julie. On March 4th, the Secretary of State signed and sent a cable to all Fulbright commissions and public diplomats in American embassies that redefined guidelines for nominating and reviewing both U.S. and non-U.S. candidates for the 2025-26, as well as the 2026 and 27 academic years. They had to be in alignment with the current administration for finalizing the grant proposals. Next slide, please. So it is unknown how many awards were revoked this spring. The executive directors of European Fulbright commissions report 20 to 25% of the awards were terminated. Let me say they were not happy about it. The specific criteria and methodologies the State Department used to flag proposals for revocation are unclear. However, according to individuals close to the program administration, the canceled programs often included climate change, discrimination, diversity, indigenous people, equality, racism, and women. And most importantly, this cancellation of awards was in direct violation of the federal statute of the Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961. Next slide, please. According to the FFSB, other grants that were eliminated had no apparent or evidential relationship to DEI. Those proposals included biology, engineering, architecture, agriculture, crop sciences, biochemistry, medical sciences, music, and history. I'll also say that during our Minnesota Fulbright uh, Thanksgiving celebration this fall, I was talking to um, a Humphrey fellow from Malawi, and she told me that she was very careful about what was on her social media because she knew that if any reference was made to Hamas or um, Palestine, that she would be cut from the application process. So um, there was some communication among grantees. Boy, she was one out of about 20 that were selected. It's very, very competitive, at least that program. Okay, on June 11th this year, 11 of the 12 members of the FFSC objected to this clear violation of over 79 years of precedent practice, and they resigned. Very surprising. Um, the members of the FFSB are supposed to be nonpartisan. They are nominated, selected by the sitting president, and I think it's 4 at a time that are selected. So there's a rotation according to which administration it is. Right now, there is no information about whether those positions are going to be filled, if it's just going to be one person that remains on it. If the current president is going to select 11 more members to do it, we just don't know. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the other ripple effects of this? Public diplomacy officers at U.S. embassies all over the world have pressured worldwide commissions to be in alignment with the current administration's political preferences and to silence public criticism of the State Department's policies. U.S. allies and longstanding friends of the U.S. can no longer trust the United States. The State Department's vetting and revocation policies have seriously compromised the Fulbright program's global reputation for academic freedom and rigor, and has damaged the reputation of the U.S. among its allies. What else? Well, students are saying to heck with this. I'll go to other countries for my international exchanges and study. And we know so well that once people start going someplace and they have to change, it's really hard to get them to change to come back. And I'm just going to insert here too that it's pretty well known that the environment right now in the United States for anyone who wasn't born here and is white is not very friendly and is definitely hostile. That impacts whether or not people want to come here or whether their families will let them come here. Now, some commissions, and I know of one for sure, that just came up with the money. It has to be a wealthy country. And that particular country just went ahead, the grants that were revoked, gave the grant money to those applicants so that they could participate. But the universities where some of these scholars are studying are very concerned about the lack of academic freedom. That is a big problem. Okay, next slide, please. So it goes on and on. On November 10th, I don't know if any of you heard of this, 6 members of the Netherlands Commission also resigned. They followed in the footsteps of the US FFSB. Of these 6 members, half were American and half were Dutch. And in their resignation letter, they said, quote, the policies of the current US administration critically undermine the mission, and the principles that have guided the Fulbright program for 80 years. Imposing political constraints on the selection of Fulbright candidates and their fields of study runs counter to the basic principles of academic freedom. And then I had just mentioned about last Friday's release of the National Security Agenda. Um, so there not a whole lot of people know about that. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? What I do know is that there are two subcommittees that have are proponents of continuing full funding, which is $288 million to the State Department for the administration of the international exchange programs, primarily the Fulbright program. But nothing has been signed. Nothing's gone to another level of committees. I'm not really clear on, and maybe some of you can help me out with this, but I was out of the country, but I think the budget bill is going to be brought up again in January. So maybe that's when it's going to be discussed. And so I just see this as the current administration finding all sorts of ways to get in there, whether it's creating fear about the climate in the United States, getting into all the different departments and the decisions, monkeying around with the funding, hurting the grantees for a while. Um, it's interfering and destroying the program, just like Voice for America was destroyed, pulling out of other organizations that are global. My biggest concern about this when it comes to democracy is ignoring the statutes. I mean, the Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961, which was signed into law, which is kind of an update of the Fulbright Scholarship Act of 1946, is just a blatant disregard of following those statutes. And we have a program here that has worked very successfully for 80 years, very vigorous. Anyway, I could go on and on. Next slide, please. I'm a little biased. Okay, now one thing I've learned through my advocacy is that the general public has some misinformation, whether it comes from the administration or just the population at large, about Fulbright. And I just want to go over these in case you encounter them or you've heard them. Some people think the Fulbright program has ended. It's not. It's moving along. I cannot give you exact numbers. I know we have some grantees that arrived this fall to Minnesota. The Fulbright program is elitist. That is a misconception. Hey, I don't have a PhD. All I have is a master's degree, and I participated in the Fulbright Teacher Exchange. The students that have recently graduated from college, they can be a ETA, an educational, a language assistant. The Fulbright program is foreign aid. This is coming out real strongly from Washington. Another thing, the Fulbright program is wasted government spending, and that came out of one of the executive orders. The Fulbrighters have a vacation instead of studying and working. They're just going to go over to another country and, I don't know, sit at the bar and drink wine and chat with people. And that Fulbright is a free trip overseas. Those are definitely misconceptions. Next slide, please. Okay, my conclusion, finally. Fulbright challenges America first. I'm thinking this is one of the main reasons why the current administration wants to get rid of it. The current administration has secretly and quietly interfered with the selection of grantees in violation of the Fulbright-Hays Act of 1961. The current administration has damaged the reputation of the United States overseas. The current administration has caused decreased participation due to threats of cutting funds, visas, and the arrest of foreigners. Next slide, please. And I'm going to ask for your participation here as well, and I will address the questions. What can we do, or what can you do? Well, you can write your representatives about concerns about the illegal actions of the current administration. You can communicate the importance of international education to your representatives. You can communicate that international students contribute $488 million to the Minnesota economy. That was documented in 2024. Some of you may have seen that article in the paper. I think it was from August of this year. You can communicate and give examples of the benefit of immigrants to our communities. You can communicate the truth about the 1961 Fulbright Hayes Act, the rigorous selection process, and the bilateral nature of Fulbright. The United States is not paying for all these grants. Other countries are contributing, like I said, up to half, more than half. Next slide, please. And my sources. I most of my information came from Lonnie Johnson. He's a former executive director of the Austrian Fulbright Commission. He served in 1997 to 2019. He is currently working very diligently on the history of the Fulbright program. I find the title of his book interesting, Remembering and Forgetting Fulbright, A History of the Fulbright Program from Truman to Trump, 1946 to 2026. Also from the Fulbright Resolution, which I got online, I read to you. From Tammy Hettinger, the executive director of the Fulbright Association. I really wanted to know the current status of the funding for the grantees that are here and also some that are overseas, because I did read in the paper that there was a U.S. grantee in, I think it was South Korea, that was stranded without money. And that she found out from ECA that the money is coming through and it is full, the 100% of what they're supposed to be getting. And then also from Shaz Akram, the former directory of the Fulbright Association and the chair of our National Advocacy Committee. So I'll try to answer any questions that you have.